A warm welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. Vajpayee, the first non-Congress Prime Minister, a 5-year term. And by the way, this is the third discussion on Vajpayee's Prime Ministership. We held similar sessions on books written on Vajpayee by Shakti Sinha, and the other person is Sitapati. I very much wanted to have Sitapati here. It's just that he's in Chicago on a teaching assignment, so he couldn't join us. So let me first introduce our guests this evening. Sagar Ghosh, a very distinguished writer, columnist. St. Stephen's, Oxford University, Rhodes Scholar, BBC World, CNN IBN, author of 2 books on Indira Gandhi and Vajpayee, 2 novels, and she's working on another biography. She would rather not talk about it at this point of time. We have with us Simran. She has a degree in engineering. Then she went to the American University in Washington to do an international relations master's degree. She is a columnist for the Khaleej Times and Al Arabiya. She has worked with the Indian Express, and she was an assistant editor with the Tribune. A warm welcome to both of you. Sagarika, I think you have written a very fine book. Congratulations. It's very well researched and very well written. I'm sure it will do very well in the market. Vajpayee is a bundle of contradictions. And he is one of the very few people, I don't know if there is anybody else who got elected to the Lok Sabha as many as 10 times. And he was also a member of the Rajya Sabha twice. And he was, as I said, the first non-Congress Prime Minister who completed 5 years, almost 5 years. I think it was foolish on some people's part that they pushed him to call elections a little earlier before he completed his term, because somebody else was impatiently waiting to occupy the Prime Minister's chair. Anyway, that's a different story. The book is a very fair assessment of Vajpayee's life and times. And you can see that, she has a sympathetic to our subject, because he went through a lot of troubles from within his own party, and he was, his prime ministership is remembered for the Pokhran coup and economic reforms undertaken by Narasimha Rao, taking them forward and doing a lot more than what Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh could do. And but there were a lot of people in his own party who did not like his bohemian lifestyle and the way he wanted to kind of run India by taking everybody along, because the party could never cross the 200 seats in the Lok Sabha, and he needed help from other parties. He's been Prime Minister of India 3 times. The first time only 13 days, second time 13 months, and third time he completed nearly 5 years. So, tell us about how you decided to write this book, and what is your assessment of the man? Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat, and thanks a lot to the NCC for having me here to talk about my biography. It's a pleasure to be here and great to be with you. I think the reason why I decided to write the book was basically because I'm writing a series of three biographies of three prime ministers, which I've been commissioned to by my publisher. So the first biography was of Indira Gandhi, which came out in 2017. This is the second, Vajpayee. And there's a third, and who it is, I can't tell you. So it's a secret. So, and the shift between Vajpayee, who was Prime Minister from the late 90s to 2004, and also a BJP Prime Minister, also a Prime Minister who belonged to the RSS, to see the shift from Vajpayee's era to now, when we also have a BJP Prime Minister and an RSS Prime Minister. Now, Vajpayee's era was marked, as you noted, by consensus building and by reconciliation. And the contrast that comes across between Vajpayee and Modi is that although Vajpayee was rooted in the RSS, he always said, I am a Swayam Sevak. He was rooted in the RSS and rooted in the BJP, yet he was a pragmatic constitutional politician who reached out. Yet he was a pragmatic and constitutional politician who reached out for reconciliation, even with those who were his ideological adversaries. Vajpayee was not someone who called anyone any gang, Khan Market gang or Tukre Tukre gang. These were not adjectives that Vajpayee would use, because in spite of being a Hindu nationalist, and he was open about his Hindu nationalism, and a member of the RSS, he was a practical, pragmatic, middle of the road politician. And I think he genuinely believed, that if India had to be run, it had to be run with consensus. The interesting thing about Vajpayee was that one of his closest friends was Hirendranath Mukherjee of the Communist Party. Another close friend was Bhupesh Gupta of the CPI. Another close friend was Minu Masani of the Swatantra Party. So he had friends across the board with people who were ideologically opposed to him. So I think the Vajpayee years, to me, give us a vital lesson. And the lesson they give us is that you can have differences, you can have ideological differences, you can have differences of opinion, you can have political differences, but you can still be friends. You can still reach out to the other side for dialogue. That's, to me, the learning experience of Vajpayee, that he always strove for dialogue, even with people who didn't agree with him. He had a government in 1999 consisting of Mamata Banerjee of the Trinamool, Jayalalitha of the AIADMK, he had Naveen Patnaik, Chandrababu Naidu, to manage this vast alliance. You needed someone who could see the other side as well. So I think that's what makes Vajpayee, in a sense, a very noteworthy prime minister, is that he operated within these parameters of constitutional democracy. Remember, as you rightly say, he was not a parliamentarian for 10 years or for 20 years or for 30 years or for 40 years, but for 50 years. For 50 years, Vajpayee was in parliament. And he operated according to the rules of parliament, standing committees, procedures, select committees. So Mr. Modi has come into the parliament only 8 years ago. He, for the first time, became an MP in 2014. So that's another difference. Vajpayee acquired state power right at the end of his life, when he was almost 75 years old. He was all his life an opposition politician working in parliament. And we used to see him, on the backbenches, roaring and hooting, and giving what he called the garma garam bhashan, and so that he was that kind of a politician. He was not a politician who would use state power, because he never had access to state power, to play politics in that sense. So for me, the assessment I would make of Vajpayee is that he was an ambitious and ruthless politician. If you ask me what he believed in, did he believe in Hindu nationalism? Did he believe in constitutional democracy? Did he believe in liberal values? Did he believe in nationalist values? I would say Vajpayee, at the end of the day, believed in Vajpayee. He was a very strong believer in himself and his own sense of manifest destiny. And my other assessment of him is that, in spite of being ideologically rooted and in spite of being ideologically placed in a particular box, he always tried to come out of the box and reach out for dialogue. And that's a difficult thing to do. It shows that you can have an ideology but still listen to other people. You can believe in something very strongly but still uphold pluralism. Today we're so divided, bhakts, kam bhakts, secularists, nationalists, these camps. I don't think Vajpayee was a creature of camps. I don't think he would have liked to be, positioned in any camp. I think he was someone who really did believe, in that sense, in the politics of dialogue and the politics of universal friendship. So I think that is his value as a prime minister.
He worked with 3 generations of the Nehru Gandhi family. Nehru was his hero. And when he himself became the prime minister, in a manner of speaking, he was actually following Nehru's policies.
Yeah.
And then when Mrs. Gandhi went to war with Pakistan or Bangladesh, he described her as Durga. But when she declared emergency, he would attack her day in and day out. But the beauty of relationships in those days was, inside parliament, you would attack them, but outside, they were friends. Unfortunately, that kind of thing doesn't seem to exist here. People, it's, and also his friendship with people.
Yeah,
who,
his relationships.
Yeah, English-speaking people, he loved it.
He loved
All these people, and they would call him Dada. He would call, Hiren Mukherjee, and they would say, "Hey, Atal," and all that kind of stuff. That's a beautiful kind of situation to be in those days. And when I see today the proceedings of Parliament on, on television, you feel so sad. You long for those beautiful days where you could be, a rival, or you could express an opinion that is different from the ruling this thing. And Nehru himself would listen to Vajpayee when he spoke in Hindi carefully, and then he would stand up and refer to Vajpayee and start speaking and all that. And that's beautiful. Also, somebody like Narasimha Rao sending him to the UNHRC as leader, that's a remarkable kind of thing. I wonder if that kind of thing can ever happen in today's politics. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I discovered, a big treat for me when I was researching this book, was actually going through the parliamentary debates of the 1950s and 1960s. What debates? What debates? The wit, the knowledge, the erudition, Hirendranath Mukherjee, Bhupesh Gupta, Minu Masani, Nath Babu Pai, these were the, stalwart parliamentarians, and they made the most incredible speeches. There are speeches which really can be books, in themselves, and they were delivered extempore by these very brilliant men who were in Parliament at the time, and I felt that that really was the golden age of India's Parliament. It was a time when Parliament was the center of India. So in that sense, Vajpayee was a creature of that era, of that 1950s and 1960s. And if you look at Vajpayee's personal life, I think this is a real mark of the man. He lived all his life with a married woman who he fell in love with in college. He lived with her husband, and their two children in the same house all his life in a menage a trois. So, I mean, to me, this is highly unconventional. I mean, it's a highly bohemian personal relationship, and he never tried to hide it. He lived all his life with her, and they were certainly not platonic. It was not a platonic relationship. It was in fact a romantic relationship, and he lived, and the three of them lived together. So someone who can do that openly and still be prime minister, I think deep down is a real iconoclast, right? I mean, so he's iconoclastic and irreverent about everything. He was irreverent about the shibboleths of Nehruvian secularism and socialism, which he attacked. He was irreverent about the RSS. He didn't like RSS dogma. He was irreverent about the notion that Bharatiya Sanskriti was frozen in time. He was irreverent about the socialistic principles of the economy. He was just an irreverent iconoclast who believed in his own view. And I think, whether that kind of person can exist today, I think, when we look at it, if we look at the generation of the 1940s and 1930s, I mean, 1930s and 1940s, the freedom movement, the freedom struggle generation, they were a generation who were highly individualistic. Maybe if you plunge into Andolan, or you plunge into a movement, a political movement which envelops you, whether it's the independence movement or in Vajpayee's case, the RSS, you lose the middle class bourgeois notions of relationships. You lose this notion that husband wife, two by two kids. That's not your worldview, right? You got into a movement, you left your family, you've plunged into a movement. And Vajpayee resisted his father to join the RSS. His father was Krishna Bihari Vajpayee, Pandit Krishna Bihari Vajpayee, who was the Inspector General of Schools in Gwalior, and who didn't approve of Vajpayee's membership of the RSS. And so he abandoned his family in a way, and joined the RSS. And I think that generation were very unconventional. If you look at, Ram Manohar Lohia, who lived with a woman he never married. If you look at Gandhi, his personal relationships. If you look at Nehru's relationships with, various people. He was a single man, and he did have many close women friends. So I think Vajpayee comes from that era when you gave yourself to a movement, and you were this, you were someone who was swamped in a movement, and you were a very individualistic person because you had made very serious choices in life. You had made the very serious choice of giving up your entire family, giving up your home. You had joined the RSS. I mean, where is Vajpayee's family today? We don't know, right? I mean, of course, we know Namita and Ranjan, but because they are known in Delhi. But they are not occupying any posts or occupying any positions or anything. We don't know who his family is. So he gave it all up and he joined a movement. So I think that was another time. It was another generation. And I think that in that sense, he was someone who reveled in the fellowship of parliament. There's this wonderful story where he's telling Nehru that I know that the prime minister does the Shirshasana, the headstand. Nehru should do the headstand. And he says, I know that the prime minister does the headstand, but that doesn't mean he should see my party upside down. So because Nehru's views on the Janasangh were very trenchant, of course. And then he had, a lot of jokes about Y.V. Chavan. Y.V. Chavan was he was a minister in Nehru's cabinet. He was a minister in Shastri's government. He was, of course, a minister in Indira Gandhi's government. He was chief minister of Maharashtra. So Vajpayee once said that you look at Y.V. Chavan, in Nehru's government, he used to wear a churidar kurta. In Shastri's government, he's wearing a dhoti. Now with Indira Gandhi as prime minister, what is he going to wear? Because she was known for her elegant saris. So he was full of all these jokes. And when he was foreign minister in 1977, Vasant Sathe, he was the Janta's foreign minister, and Vasant Sathe of the Congress said, well, Mr. Vajpayee, we don't take you seriously as a finance minister. Because the rumor is that Mr. Morarji Desai, who is the prime minister, makes the policy. Mr. Jagat Mehta, who's the foreign secretary, actually implements it, and you just translate it to Hindi. So Vajpayee said, look at this. All this time I've been speaking English, and Mr. Vasant Sade thinks I'm speaking Hindi. So now I better switch to Hindi again. So he thinks I continue to speak Hindi. So that was the fun of the man. He was extremely funny, and he reveled in these contacts with opposite ends of the parliamentary spectrum. He had the same kind of irreverent humor for his own RSS men. Nanaji Deshmukh was a sort of staunch RSS veteran. And at a dinner once at the home of Appa Ghatate, and Appa Ghatate is this wonderful character who was Vajpayee's closest friend, and I had great access to Appa because Appa gave me the book actually, and it's a heartburn for me, the heartache for me that Appa is no longer alive. But at this dinner, Appa had invited Nanaji Deshmukh and Vajpayee and some others. And Nanaji said at the dinner that Deen Dayal Upadhyay has come in my dream and has said, avoid chicken. So Vajpayee says, Arey Nanaji. Does everyone here follow Hindi? इतने बड़े आदमी आपके सपने में आते हैं और इतना ही कहते हैं कि चिकन मत खाओ. So that was the kind of fun person he was, and using humor very interestingly to play his politics. So can such a person be possible today with this kind of division that we see between opposition and government? Between the kind of money power we see, the kind of muscle power we see. Remember, in 1999, Vajpayee's government fell by one vote. One vote. Can we imagine a government today falling by one vote? I mean, that vote would be, bought and sold I don't know how many times. But I mean, so it was in 1999 that in Parliament, his 13-month government fell by that one vote, which I think is very significant and says a lot about the integrity and sanctity of parliamentary processes that Vajpayee upheld in his time. His closest associate was, one of his closest associates was George Fernandes. And George Fernandes, in today's times, I think would have been called, anti-national. George was a trade unionist. He was a, supporter of the Myanmar students. He was, left-wing on the economy. And he was Vajpayee's closest associate. So, such a person, I think it would be difficult to find such a person in government today. So was Brajesh Mishra. Brajesh Mishra, Jaswant Singh. These were not RSS men. They were Vajpayee's closest compatriots. So I think that, he was a kind of a person who tried to marry different aspects. And there was so much more to him than just an RSS man. But did he fail the test of constitutional democracy? Many times, I think he did. We can talk about that in the next question.
Simran.
So I was a little curious. You said, probably he won't fit in today with the political climate we have. So my question is, what has changed? Has India changed? Have we as the people of India changed? Has the BJP changed? Has the RSS changed? Why would a man like Vajpayee, who was widely respected, loved, still is, why do you think he would not find acceptability today? What is the change? Is it us? Is it the party? Is it the country? What has it changed?
All of those things. I think in Vajpayee's time, first and foremost, Parliament was the center of India. And you rose to prominence because of your position in Parliament. Nehruvian parliamentary democracy made possible the rise of Nehru's opponents. So you rose to power because of Parliament and how you performed in Parliament. Your parliamentary speeches were very important, and that's how you gained prominence. Today we have, because of media, social media, YouTube, we have the rise of the personality cult. The personality cult politicians. Mahua Moitra, for example, as you know, the Trinamool MP, she's a brilliant parliamentarian. but she can't win her seat in Bengal without the cultural personality of Mamata Banerjee. Her performance in parliament does not determine her electability. You know, there's a disjunction between parliament and election. So in Vajpayee's time, they were rooted in parliament. Now, when there's this disjunction, when there is the cult of personality, like it happened in Indira Gandhi's time, then institutions tend to crumble, because then it's only the personality that dominates the scene, and that personality is made dominant through media, through social media, through WhatsApp groups, through communication. There's been a communication revolution since Vajpayee. I don't think Vajpayee could have ever been on Twitter or Facebook. You know, his speeches were really long. There were huge pauses between his speeches. Television journalists used to say, "Arey yaar, ab to commercial break mein jana padega," because he'd say one word, then 10 minutes later there'd be another word. So I think the media has created a politics of personality cult. This kind of a media saturated environment that we live in. It wasn't there in Vajpayee's time. It was just beginning. And also, I think because of the efforts of the RSS and because of the kind of communal mobilization that started in the early 1990s, today the communal vote, which was marginal in Vajpayee's time, seems to be almost, has reached critical mass. And this has happened through a systematic campaign of communication, you know, of WhatsApps, of Twitter, of monopoly of the media. Now, in Vajpayee's time, there was no monopoly of the media. You know, I was a journalist in Indian Express during Vajpayee's era, and we used to constantly question the government. Today, I think what has happened is the media has completely capitulated to the political executive. And I think because of the capitulation of the media, you have a super powerful political executive which is riding roughshod over all institutions, whether it's parliament, whether it's cabinet, whether it's judiciary, whether it's media, whether it's the universities. India as a system, as a fragile democracy, cannot withstand a very powerful executive. You know, Indira Gandhi actually did the same. You know, I would say that Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi have a lot more in common than Narendra Modi and Mr. Vajpayee. I have often called Narendra Modi Narendra Modi, you know, because she was similar. She had complete control over her party. She had complete control she exercised control over the judiciary or civil service, parliament, party. She was the all in all. She was a supreme personality cult. And I think, therefore, what has happened, and of course, now you have that personality cult politics with the media revolution. I think it's down to the media revolution. You know, I would say it's the media revolution and capture of the media which has made possible the rise of what we are calling elected autocracy. That is, elected politicians who come through the elected system, but then turn their backs on democratic institutions. And this is there all over the world, whether, you know, Viktor Orban in Hungary is just the same, and he's won a huge election. In Poland, we have the same phenomenon. So I think what has changed is the media revolution, the communication revolution, the massive mobilization on communal lines that has been taking place since 1990s. Vajpayee was not a Hindutva prime minister. You know, he was a member of the RSS and a member of the BJP, and a lifelong member of the RSS. But he pursued government as a liberal politician, as a liberal statesman, which is why I call him a liberal statesman. And in Vajpayee's time, you know, if you look at it from 1999 to 2004, you had continuous attacks on him from the Sangh Parivar. The Swadeshi Jagran Manch was attacking him for his liberalization policies. The Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh was attacking him for his labor reforms. He was being attacked by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad for not moving fast on the mandir. The organizer, you know, the mouthpiece of the RSS, wrote an editorial saying Vajpayee should be consigned to the dustbin. Dattopant Thengadi, the RSS leader who was part of the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, held an open rally saying Yashwant Sinha aparadhi hai. He's an aparadhi. The finance minister is an offender. And I sometimes think, where are these groups today? You know, where are these groups? Where's Dattopant Thengadi, and where's Swadeshi Jagran Manch, and where's Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh? Where are they today? Why are they also not agitating and on the streets? And I think it's because they are, in this government, much more assimilated in the government. They are much more part of the government. They have much more stake in the government. So the RSS is much more entwined in this government than it was in Vajpayee's time. Vajpayee kept the RSS completely at bay. You know, he kept them distant from government. And Yashwant Sinha and Jaswant Singh, and Jaswant Singh I had interviewed him years ago, and he told me that, you know, the RSS was always at our throats, and Vajpayee said, "Unki baat nahi suniye, aap apna kaam kijiye, you know, just do your own work." So he kept the RSS at bay. This time, I think what is happening is, what happened with Vajpayee's defeat in 2004, Vajpayee was annihilated in 2004. And with the annihilation of Vajpayee, the Sangh Parivar became convinced that this middle of the road, pluralist, centrist, accommodating line does not win elections. And they became convinced, and Ram Madhav said it, many RSS men said it, I've quoted it. Now we have to do Vichardhara. Vichardhara, Vichardhara, Vichardhara. That is what is going to win us elections. So I think the entire Sangh Parivar, after the defeat of Vajpayee in 2004, swung completely towards ideology. You know, that the Vajpayee line of pluralism, economic reform, reaching out to neighbors, Nehruvian foreign policy, that got completely discredited. And so you had the rise of an ideological stream within the Sangh Parivar and within the BJP that said, you know, this Vajpayee line is completely dead and buried, we need to go this way. And then, of course, the Congress went on to win not just 2004, but 2009. And by this time, I think the feeling was that unless we adopt an ideological line, and unless we go the Hindutva way, we will not be able to win. And so they did go the Hindutva way, and of course, it has won them big victories. But had Vajpayee won in 2004, I think India would have been a very different place. You know, had he been able to win that election of 2004, I think India would have been would have then the BJP would have been convinced that Vajpayee is an election winner, that he can win elections. This line can win elections. It turned out that he lost, and he lost badly. Vajpayee could never win big elections. He could never win big. His ceiling was 182 seats. He could never take the BJP beyond 182 seats. And there were people in the RSS and the Sangh Parivar who were always uncomfortable with Vajpayee, because they always thought he was, you know, some would say he's a half congressman, he's a Congress's planted man in the RSS, you know, he's too Nehruvian for us. They were always uncomfortable and unhappy with Vajpayee. And if Vajpayee had managed to deliver election results, they would have been happy. But he was not able to win. He was not, the Vajpayee BJP formed a government, but it formed a coalition government. And so I think when Mr. Modi arrives on the scene, you know, when he arrives on the scene in 2001, when he's sent to Gujarat, and 2002 wins that big Gujarat election, and he wins it on pure Hindutva consolidation, on pure majoritarianism and Hindutva, then it becomes clear that here's Modi with his majoritarianism and his Hindutva, and he's winning these big elections. And here's Vajpayee with his centrist, pluralist, you know, middle of the road line, who's not being able to win. So I think Moditva destroyed Vajpayeeism. That's what I've said in my book. The rise of Modi destroyed Vajpayee. Vajpayee was unable to combat the challenge that was posed to him by Modi, because Modi was winning elections on a Hindutva plank, on the Hindu Hriday Samrat, on the Hindu consolidation. Vajpayee was never Hindu Hriday Samrat. You know, he was stable Atal. He was he was Atal Bihari, Abki Bari Atal Bihari. There was no Hindutva associated with Vajpayee. Now, the question is often asked that if Vajpayee had 300 seats, would he also be, a Hindutva hero? I don't think so, because I think Vajpayee was too rooted in parliament. He was too rooted in parliament. I think cancelling Article 370 by executive diktat or bringing in the CAA in the manner that they have done, I think that would have been against his principles as a parliamentarian. But I think what happened in the BJP is that Vajpayee became more and more diminished and more marginalized because Modi was winning the elections in Gujarat and Vajpayee was not being able to win.
So would you say it's all about winning elections? Whatever ideology wins you the votes, that is the ideology a party would follow? Or do you think that maybe Modi's rise is also somewhere throwing light on who we really are? I mean, he's winning so much of elections. Are we
Possible.
really voting for what we really feel deep down? Is that also
Possibly.
true?
I mean, the question is, why is he winning these elections, right? Why did he win so very strongly in Gujarat? He clearly won because Hindutva is tapping into something that India has not been able to come out of, which is religious hatred. So if you tap into, Vajpayee never tapped into religious hatred. He did go along with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. He did go along with the Rath Yatra. He did go along with the, after the fall of the Babri Masjid, he did go along with that mobilization. But religious hatred has been in India since partition. P.N. Haksar, the principal secretary of Indira Gandhi, said that ghosts of partition will never go away from India. So if you choose to play the card of religious hatred, you will strike a chord in people. I don't think religious hatred has ever gone away from us. I don't think we've changed. I think what has happened is leaders have never played this game before. Leaders have never openly played the game of religious hatred before. Indira Gandhi actually did do it in her second term. She did try to do some Hindutva consolidation. But I don't think mainstream politicians have ever played as much hard Hindutva politics as is being played today. So in that sense, it's not that we have changed, but our leaders have changed, and the leaders are playing a politics which is clearly, sort of finding an appeal with people. But I think the appeal was always there. We've had, millions of people were slaughtered in 1947. There have been riots in India throughout our post-independence history. Imagine if we had Twitter and Facebook during the time of partition. I mean, our country was born amidst the religious holocaust, amidst the flames of religious hatred. So as a result, every politician has actually tried to steer clear of this religious hatred. Nehru tried to completely destroy it. Indira Gandhi in her early terms tried to destroy it. VP Singh, Chandrasekhar, Manmohan Singh, Narsimha Rao, they didn't play religious politics. Today we have a leader who's openly playing religious politics and tapping into this hatred that has always existed with us. I think that's the difference.
Sagarika, you say it was Vajpayee who encouraged Modi to come back to India. When
Yeah.
you met him in the US,
Yeah.
how long are you going to stay here? Abhi jao and all that kind of thing.
कितने देर तक यहाँ रहना है,
हाँ, रहना
वापस आ
है।
जाओ.
But when Godra happened, anti-Muslim riots happened, Vajpayee was very upset. Talked about leaders having to observe Raj Dharma. It is his way of saying that Modi should quit. And he was very keen that Modi should quit. And he made attempts at least in 6 meetings, according to
Yeah.
But Advani and Jaitley and all these people were vehemently opposed to the idea of Modi being, kicked out of the chief ministership. And it so happened that in the 2004 election, I met Vajpayee in Gwalior. in a village. He was sitting on a cot. And I caught up with him. I said, when is the meeting? वो आधा घंटा में शुरू होगा. But यहाँ कोई नहीं है. वो राजमाता आएंगे ना, फिर लोग आएंगे. But he could see. In fact, he tells Gatate and several other people. I can sense the response of the people. वो उसको हटाए नहीं, बड़ी गलती हुई हमसे. It says we didn't sack Modi, and we are paying for it by losing the election. Just if he had asserted himself and he sacked Modi, what do you think would have happened? This is just
I think then, I think first of all, I mean, that's a counterfactual, but Modi was Vajpayee's biggest failure. Vajpayee was a very ruthless politician. He was not, I'm saying he was a pluralist and he was a centrist, but he was not a cozy, fuzzy-wuzzy liberal. I mean, he was a very ruthless politician.
Absolutely.
As was Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi, Vajpayee, I mean, these are not nice people. I mean, they're not sweet, nice people. I mean, they are very ruthless, clever politicians. And Vajpayee was a very clever politician. And if you look at Vajpayee's career, whether in the 1950s and early 60s, it was his tussle with Balraj Madhok. And Vajpayee very cleverly isolated Balraj Madhok. And Balraj Madhok was expelled from the Janasangh in 1973 by Advani. Then Vajpayee came across Govindacharya, who in 1997 called him the Mukhota. As soon as he did that, Govindacharya was out of the exit door. Kalyan Singh, who was a backward caste leader who Vajpayee was never comfortable with, because Vajpayee was very much a Brahminical leader, very Brahmin in his outlook. Kalyan Singh was a backward caste leader. Kalyan Singh called Vajpayee a retired leader, led by retired officials. So once he said that was the end of Kalyan Singh. Kalyan Singh was out of the exit door. So Balraj Madhok was finished. Kalyan Singh was finished. Govindacharya was finished. But his last rival was Narendra Modi, who he could not finish. Because I think by then, Vajpayee was too tired and too feeble, too weak. He was, his health was bad. I used to go and meet him when he was campaigning for the 2004 elections, and he used to keep telling me, "Ye problem hai, wo problem hai, arey, mujhe kahan jana pad raha hai." He was very, very ill. He was very ill by 2004. So he was too weak and too ill. And I think, what should have happened ideally is he should have become prime minister in 1977. If Vajpayee had become prime minister in 1977, I think the party he led would have been a very different BJP. He founded the BJP in 1980 as the party of Gandhian socialism, Gandhivadi Samajwad. That was the identity of the BJP in 1980. But sadly for Vajpayee, Gandhivadi Samajwad pe chalne wali BJP could never win elections. In 1981, they lost. 1983, lost the assembly elections in Andhra and Karnataka. 1983, lost that big election in Jammu and Kashmir. And then in 1984, of course, annihilated by Indira Gandhi's assassination and finished, down to 2 seats. So all of this, was making the Sangh Parivar and RSS increasingly fed up with Vajpayee and impatient with Vajpayee, with his Gandhivadi, Samajwad, pluralism, middle of the road. They were getting increasingly upset. So he started off by being the RSS's golden boy. He was Golwalkar's golden boy. Golwalkar of the RSS, Sarsanchalak of the RSS for 30 years, adored Vajpayee and projected Vajpayee as the face. But by the time he came to the later chapters of his life, it was Advani who became the RSS's Hindu hero, and Vajpayee became the stepson. He became the the high-achieving stepchild who was always doing the wrong thing. His relationship with Mrs. Kaul was very difficult for RSS to swallow. Here was their top leader, their main leader, who was living with a woman and her husband in a threesome. So this was very difficult for the RSS to deal with, and he never hid it, and he in fact flaunted it. So Vajpayee's relationship with the Sangh Parivar was getting more and more difficult as he went on in years. So, which is why it became difficult for him to remove Modi, because he couldn't assert himself in the way that he could have, perhaps in the 1950s or the 1980s, in the 1970s and the 1980s. You know, he was simply not strong enough. If he had managed it, if he had managed to sack Modi as he wanted to, I think the BJP then would have been very different. It would have been probably much more in the Vajpayee mold, but would it have won elections? I don't know. That's an open question, because Vajpayee could never, as I said, could never win big. He could never win more than 182. He could, under Vajpayee, the BJP could never cross more than 182 seats.
One more question I want to ask, then we'll throw the discussion to question. The relationship between Vajpayee and Advani.
Yeah.
You see, Vajpayee, Advani was the one who did the hard work. Rath Yatra, he was an organization man, and his only problem was very conscious of the fact that compared to Vajpayee's oratorial skills, he was nowhere. And it was Advani who declared in Bombay that if we come to power, Vajpayee will be our prime minister. But I find Vajpayee, a Brahmin from Gwalior, scotch guzzling, chicken loving, movie watching,
meat eating.
I mean, everything the Brahmanism abhors, he was practicing it and living with a married woman, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, all of that.
But Advani tolerated all this, but I get the feeling that he did not treat him as an equal. He was not, a group of the drinking partners,
No.
Okay.
I think that's a very good question, the relationship between Vajpayee and Advani. Because, Vajpayee, we have to remember, in 1957, was already a star. He was already the superstar in parliament. He was a fantastic speaker. He was a great orator. He was an outstanding parliamentarian. And he was someone who caught Nehru's eye. And in those days, to have a conversation, to have an exchange with Nehru on the floor of Parliament was a big thing. The Prime Minister himself has acknowledged you and has spoken to you. And M.K. Rasgotra, the former Foreign Secretary, had actually told, actually said that Nehru had told Rasgotra that you should introduce Vajpayee to world leaders and to the world, because Vajpayee is a politician to follow. So Vajpayee was Nehru, had caught Nehru's eye, and he was the RSS favorite. He was a star. He was very handsome. He was very well spoken. He was a brilliant figure. Advani at that time was nobody. He was just an RSS pracharak working in Rajasthan. And when Advani first met Vajpayee in 1957, Advani was the speech drafter. He used to research the speeches and he used to work on the speeches, and Vajpayee used to deliver them with great aplomb. Because in those days, you had to write really good speeches. Right. You had to really prepare your speeches. It was Nehru was listening, and you had to really work on your parliamentary speeches. Today, we see such a sad day. It's such a sad day in Parliament. I mean, it's so sad, But in those days, you really had to work at it. So Vajpayee was always the star. Advani was the also-ran. And in every long relationship and every friendship, there's always a power balance, right? One person is the star, the other person is the slightly lesser person. So, and when that power balance shifts, then the star is never comfortable. So what happened was that Vajpayee continued to be the star, the BJP star, continued to be the RSS star for decades until the big loss of 1984, which was the defeat of the BJP at the hands of Indira Gandhi's assassination. When the Congress won 400 seats and the BJP was wiped out. 2 seats, and Vajpayee lost his own seat.
Very badly.
Very badly. And the shock defeat, it was a real shock defeat. Vajpayee losing, it was unthinkable. In Gwalior. And to Madhav Rao Scindia.
Who was a
novice. So, and this was the star parliamentarian, the former foreign minister, so whatever, and he lost. So his career ended. I believe that it was all over for Vajpayee in 1986. Because by 1986, the Sangh Parivar had enough of him and replaced him with Advani as party president. And Then Vajpayee never again became president of the party. Advani became party president in 1986. Once Advani became party president, Advani took the party towards the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. He said Gandhi and socialism has been a big mistake. Gandhiwadi Samajwad doesn't work. He allied with the VHP, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, with the Hindutva elements, and went into the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and took the BJP to great heights of success. BJP went from 2 seats to 89 seats, and then went on to form the government. So Advani became the architect of the election-winning BJP, and Advani was the hard worker. He was the sort of hands-on organization man, and he was the man who built the party. And Vajpayee didn't like that. He didn't like that at all, because he had always been the star. He had always been the hero. Vajpayee ka naam, Vajpayee ka kaam. That was the slogan of the BJP. Now, who is this Advani who is now coming and becoming Hindu Hriday Samrat? And so in 2003, when Venkaiah Naidu in a public in a BJP meeting said we have two leaders, Law Purush, Iron Man, and Vikas Purush, development man Vajpayee. Vajpayee didn't like it.
Yes.
And he said, then you go and fight. Advani ji ke netritva mein aap jaake election laro. You fight with Advani. I am not there. And then everybody said, nahi sir, aap hi ke saath to hum hai. He didn't like that. He didn't like that duality of Law Purush and Vikas Purush as a dualism. He was very upset with that. And he didn't like being equated with Advani. And if you see his memoirs, Vajpayee has written a 26-page memoir at the beginning of his speeches in Parliament. He gushes about Nehru, gushes about Indira Gandhi, gushes about Rajiv Gandhi. He even praises Madhav Rao Scindia, how I brought Madhav Rao Scindia into the Janasangh. He doesn't say a word about 2 lines on Deen Dayal Upadhyay, 1 line, I think, about Advani.
Half line.
Half line on Advani.
Okay.
That's about it. I mean, there's no mention of his party colleagues. So, in that sense, I would say Advani had a kind of unrequited love with Vajpayee. He was adoring of Vajpayee. He called Vajpayee his closest friend. He was my mukhya, my leader. Vajpayee barely ever mentions Advani, although in his forward to Advani's book, he writes how much respect he had. I think they had a lot of respect for each other. You can't have a relationship for so long without having respect for each other. But Vajpayee again believed consistently in himself, and he didn't like it when Advani became prominent. So there was a lot of tension in the relationship. And then, it's interesting, but their households were also involved in creating this tension, because both Vajpayee and Advani had these very powerful daughters. Vajpayee's adopted daughter was Namita, and Advani's daughter, of course, was Pratibha. And they had these households which were very possessively adoring of the respective patriarchs, and often fueled a lot of tension, because Advani's family used to feel, just saying, that Advani is doing all the hard work, he's building the party, and Vajpayee is coming and giving a few speeches and going away. And Vajpayee's family would feel that Advani was taking the BJP into a Hindutva extremist line, because Ranjan and Namita are very sort of secular people. So the households created a lot of tension also. Yashwant Sinha told me once that Yashwant Sinha had told Vajpayee that aapke rishte to bade madhur hai. You and Vajpayee, you and Advani have a very madhur, very honeyed relationship. And Vajpayee turned around and said, Madhur, is that what you think? And then went into this whole spiel about how the households were creating this tension, and how, from their side, this was this. So it was a very, I would say it was a very multi-layered relationship. And I think it stemmed a lot from the fact that Vajpayee, he always wanted the limelight. He wanted to be center stage, like Indira Gandhi. Both Indira Gandhi and Vajpayee wanted to be center stage.
And now Modi.
And now Modi. They want to be, Indira Gandhi kept saying, I want to leave politics, I want to go away from politics. She loved politics. She wanted to be in politics. She wanted to lead India. She wanted to be on her father's kursi. Vajpayee also, मैं कवि हूँ, मैं तो कविता लिखूंगा, मैं जाऊंगा उधर पढ़ाई करने के लिए, सन्यासी करूंगा, but all he wanted was the kursi. So I think that in that sense, these are, he was very ambitious. He wanted the limelight, and I think that Advani's rise made him very bitter. He was very jealous. So there was a lot of tension in the relationship, but I would say on the whole, there was a lot of mutual respect.
Right. Now, you gentlemen are welcome to ask any questions. If you have a question to ask, kindly raise your hand. A microphone will come to you and then speak to it. Identify yourself, please.
Sir, my name is Prasoon Nagar. I'm from Diplomat. He made a mistake in trusting the Pakistanis. Thanks.
I interviewed Nawaz Sharif in 2003. He was then in Jeddah. He was living in exile in Jeddah. And I asked him that, what about Mr. Vajpayee? And he said, Mr. Vajpayee was, is a close friend. He's a very good man. If we had had time in 1999, we would have solved the Kashmir issue. I did not know about Kargil. I did not know that Musharraf was planning Kargil, and I was as shocked as everybody else. I mean, that's what Nawaz Sharif said. Whether or not he knew about it or didn't know about it, of course, we have Musharraf's word for it. But I think Vajpayee did make the mistake. I wouldn't call it a mistake. I think Vajpayee, all his life as a politician, was determined to make peace with Pakistan. He in 1977, when he was foreign minister, he went to Islamabad. He, had a very successful trip there, and he said that he accepted the Shimla agreement. And pressmen then asked him, but I thought you said you attacked the Shimla. The Jansangh has always attacked the Shimla agreement. He said, yes, but I'm trying to forget my past. You also please forget my past. Try to forget my past. And that was a very interesting. I'll tell you a little aside at that press conference. Actually, somebody asked him, Vajpayee ji, forget about Pakistan and Tibet and all these issues. Tell us about Mrs. Kaul. Mrs. Kaul kaun hai? And Vajpayee said, Kashmir jaisa mamla hai. So he could say things like that. But I think that, and as a Janasanghi and as an RSS man and as a Janasangh and as a BJP prime minister, he kept reaching out to Pakistan. He kept on reaching out to Pakistan. It's as if he wanted to make this his life's mission. He opened people-to-people dialogue. He went in the bus ride in 1999. Yes, there was the Kargil war. Even after the Kargil war, he had the Agra summit. He invited Musharraf. He wanted to make peace. Then he went to Islamabad in 2004, and there was a very successful joint declaration that he made with Musharraf. And where Musharraf accepted that the soil of Pakistan will not be used for terrorist activities against India. That was in 2004 at the Islamabad joint declaration. So I think if he made a mistake, then perhaps it was a mistake of trusting, but the trust, it paid off because, yes, the Kargil war happened, but then there was Islamabad, there was, a sort of achievement of a remarkable subcontinental detente at that time. And I was there in 1999 when he went in the bus to Pakistan. I was there at the Wagah border, I was covering it. And it was a tremendous moment, It was there in the golden sunlight of the winter subcontinent, 4 o'clock in winter, and you had an Indian prime minister coming in a bus, and you had the Pakistani prime minister, the 21-gun salute, and there was music being played, and both sides were dancing, and you felt a tremendous sense that this was the biggest act of detente since independence. So I think he was very keen on creating peace with Pakistan. I don't think we should say that he made a mistake only because of the Kargil war. I think foundations were laid for much of the people-to-people contacts and much of the dialogue that Manmohan Singh was then able to take forward when he came to power. So I think Vajpayee did a lot of groundwork on Indo-Pakistan relations. It's only now that we are, looking at a breakdown in relations with Pakistan. But in Vajpayee's time and then 10 years of the UPA, there was a very strong, there were very strong ties. So I think in that sense, perhaps he he didn't realize that there would be a Kargil war, and Kargil took him entirely by surprise. But was it a mistake? I don't think so. If trust is a mistake, then it's a mistake. If peacemaking is a mistake, then it was a mistake. If believing in peace and believing in dreams and believing in a peaceful subcontinent is a mistake, then yes, perhaps he made a mistake. I don't think any of those things are mistakes.
Yeah, I fully agree. That's absolutely true. I'm very happy that Mr. Modi sent greetings to Shehbaz Sharif within minutes after he was sworn in. Let us hope that.
And I think Mr. Modi himself went to Nawaz Sharif's home and on his birthday, and unscheduled, there was a photo op and all of that. So I think much of the groundwork for that was laid by Vajpayee.
That's right. Well, yes, please go ahead. Use the microphone.
I actually wanted to ask about the IC-814 hijacking that Vajpayee had to deal with. And at that time, it was a big criticism of the Indian government was that India was a soft state, that we negotiated with terrorists, whereas many other countries in the world have a policy of not doing so. Do you think he handled that well? And how did it affect him personally?
So a biography is not a hagiography. And I have to say that on national security, Vajpayee's record is bad. What he achieved in the economy is in sharp contrast to what he achieved in national security. Because, his style of governance, the very delegating, autonomy giving, every minister giving his own, given his autonomy to do what he wanted to do. He had very strong ministers, Yashwant Sinha, Jaswant Singh, Arun Shuri, Murli Manohar Joshi, and they were all given their head and they were, told to run their ministries. But this form of delegating, autonomy giving, loose sort of government, which was very successful on the economy, it was super successful on the economy. I think we can call Vajpayee the father, in a way, of economic reforms, but was a disaster on national security. So on IC-814, it happened at the end of 1999 when, you just weathered the Kargil war, you had gone through the whole year, it had been a terrible year, you had gone through an election. He was looking forward to the new year. The government actually was caught completely on the back foot when it became clear that the IC-814 had happened. It became a Tower of Babel. Different people were saying different things. I mean, I've written about it in detail in my book. The plane was standing in Amritsar airport for 45 minutes and they couldn't immobilize it because too many people were talking. One person was calling the Punjab police chief and saying, immobilize. One person was saying, no, we can't immobilize. Somebody else was giving some other view. So it was all this. And Vajpayee was just sitting and listening to everybody. And then when the plane landed at Dubai, India had supposedly readied a commando operation to overpower the plane in Dubai, but they didn't have enough coordination to pull off that commando operation. Sharad Yadav, who was civil aviation minister, who offered to go and receive the hostages who were let off at Dubai, because women and children were let off at Dubai. Sharad Yadav didn't even have a passport. So, at the 11th hour, they were scrambling to get a passport for Sharad Yadav, and and they really had the government was really floundering on that one. And then, just to come back to our point about the communication revolution, that was also the time of the rise of 24/7 television, NDTV, Aaj Tak, they were just beaming, they had just started beaming. And those relatives, who were gathered at 7 RCR, they were screaming and crying, and 24/7, those images were being broadcast, of relatives screaming. Vajpayee just didn't know what to do with that. He just didn't know what to do with these screaming relatives 24/7 being broadcast on TV. And so the government buckled. It didn't know what to do. It was an easygoing government that was geared towards creating the economic boom. It was not a government that could deal with national security. So repeatedly he failed. And there was this one very poignant thing that when Jaswant Singh offered to take the terrorists to Kandahar, all Vajpayee says was, "Kya wo chale gaye?" Has Jaswant Singh gone? That weak voice. So he was completely caught unawares. He was completely caught on the back foot. And whether it was, Operation Parakram, which in 2000, at the end of 2001 was mobilized because of the attack on Parliament, Operation Parakram, Kargil War, IC-814, each of these incidents shows Vajpayee's government napping and falling far short. But on economy, telecom policy, infrastructure, golden quadrilateral, opening up for liberalization, globalization, he just took forward what Narasimha Rao was doing and took it to great heights. But on national security, he was a failure.
I have a question from one of people who is watching on YouTube. It seems like a Tibetan gentleman, Tenzin Jordan. His question is, what was Atalji's take on Tibet issue?
So, in fact, one of the first speeches that Vajpayee made in Parliament was on the independence of Tibet and on need for India to protect the policy towards China, the same policy towards Tibet, the same policy towards the Soviet Union, same policy towards non-alignment as Indira Gandhi and Nehru. So, in that sense, I think he did speak very strongly for Tibetan independence and for Tibetan autonomy, but did not do much for it when he was in power.
Well, very interesting discussion. It was a pleasure having you with us, Sagarika. Thank you, Simran. So very. You have a question, Vibhuti? Yeah, please go ahead. Take the mic. Use the microphone. Use the microphone.
How do you articulate the relationships between Nehruvian foreign policy and Vajpayee's foreign policy? Especially, I want to ask you about the China policy, Vajpayee and Nehru.
Well, I think in terms of foreign policy, Vajpayee pursued very much a Nehruvian foreign policy. In terms of peace with neighbors, reach out to China, reach out to Soviet Union. He very much he pursued a foreign policy in government that was at odds with the kind of policies that he may have spoken of as an opposition politician. In 1962, during the China War, Vajpayee was actually one of the opposition parliamentarians who demanded a special session of parliament and actually took the government to task, saying, what a shame this government is, and the government has sold out India, has failed India, national security has been destroyed. Can you imagine an opposition politician today speaking like that about a government in the middle of a war? That's what Vajpayee did in terms of during the 1962 war. But when in government, when he was foreign minister in 1977, Vajpayee defended non-alignment. He said non-alignment has always been part of the Indian identity. He defended India's relationship with the Soviet Union, saying that Indira Gandhi had a special relationship with the Soviet Union, and so do we. He reached out to Pakistan. What was new in Vajpayee's foreign policy after 1999, I would say, was his opening up to the United States. That was a front that neither Nehru nor Indira had pursued, although Narasimha Rao had made tentative moves towards it. But Nehru was always suspicious of the United States. So was Indira Gandhi, because of the very hostile relationship she had with Nixon, who did not support her during the 1971 Bangladesh war. But I think Vajpayee, even though he went in for nuclear tests for Pokhran 2, and that was very, it led to a lot of misunderstanding. It created outrage in Washington and, created outrage around the world. But in spite of that, within a month of the nuclear test, Vajpayee encouraged Jaswant Singh to go out for the Strobe-Talbot Jaswant Singh talks. The Jaswant Strobe-Talbot talks went on for almost a year and a half, and they very much opened the way for India's increasing closeness to the United States. So I think in terms of foreign policy, Vajpayee very much pursued a sort of Nehruvian foreign policy with China, with the USSR, with the Soviet Union. But where he didn't follow the Nehruvian foreign policy was in his reach out and opening up to the United States.
Well, thanks. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
So my question is about Advani ji. So you touched about the relationship a little bit of how they weren't in this same drinking group, and that Advani ji did feel left out. That's something Vinay Sitapati mentions in his book as well. My question is that do you feel that they didn't have an equal relationship primarily because Advani ji didn't really know what he stood for? Because Arun Shourie mentioned this like a while back that at a time Advani ji was the second most powerful man in India, and the most powerful man was the last man he met. So in some sense, like he was sort of swayed by Vajpayee's just flamboyance and the way he spoke and the way he carried himself.
Yeah, I mean, Advani was never a politician in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Advani entered the Lok Sabha in 1989. Advani was not a politician. He was someone who was very much in the shadow of Vajpayee. He was very much in the back room, who was creating the party organization. But I think Advani was a very successful BJP president. He was much more successful than Vajpayee in terms of organizing the party and creating a whole team. You know, Arun Jaitley, Sushma Swaraj, Venkaiah Naidu, Govindacharya, these are all Advani's people. Arun Jaitley, there's a story about Arun Jaitley that, Arun Jaitley joined the Janasangh in the 1970s, and it was not until 1999 that Arun Jaitley actually entered the Rajya Sabha and then didn't become a minister till 2000. And Arun Jaitley always felt that there was someone who was against him in the BJP, and that someone was Vajpayee. I've written this in the book. So I think Advani was certainly not as much of a star politician as Vajpayee, but he was a much more successful party president, and he made the BJP into a winning machine. Of course, he compromised with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, and he went into the Ram Janmabhoomi movement to build the BJP, but he made the BJP a winning machine. The BJP began to win elections after Advani became BJP president. So I don't think Advani was ever in doubt about his ideology. I think Advani knew that Hindutva ideology would bring them big electoral returns. I don't think either Vajpayee or Advani were believing devout Hindus. Vajpayee was certainly not. He was not a practicing Hindu. He had no puja in his life at all. There was no puja room in his house or anything like that. So they were not practicing believing Hindus, but they just believed cynically that the Hindu nationalist movement would raise them to power. Vajpayee shied away from it. Advani embraced it and made the BJP into a winning machine. So I think in terms of party presidents, I think Vajpayee was much more of a successful party president. Advani was a much more successful party president. But Vajpayee was the star. And I think in that sense, there was that power equation.
Well, without Advani's hard work, I wonder if Vajpayee would have become the prime minister, BJP would have got the numbers.
Yes, and it was in 1995, as I written in my book, as you mentioned, in that Mumbai Maha-Adhivesan, when all as a shock, everybody was shocked that that Advani at that Maha-Adhivesan announced Vajpayee as the prime ministerial candidate of the BJP. The whiskey drinking, chicken eating, bohemian oddball suddenly became the BJP's prime minister. And when all that time he had been in the margins, he had been marginalized completely. The journalist Neena Vyas once asked Vajpayee in 1991 that Vajpayee ji, aap to abhi margin mein hai. You are completely marginalized now. Are you in the margins? Are you completely marginalized? And Vajpayee said, correction करने के लिए margin की जरूरत होता है. We need a margin to make correction. And that's exactly what happened. For the BJP to correct its image after the Babri Masjid demolition, needed the whiskey drinking oddball. Because it was the good man in the bad party, the secularists, the oddball, who could actually bring in allies and make the BJP of winning make the BJP attractive to allies, because that was the coalition era. So the margin did become useful for a correction.
The last question.
Why do you call Vajpayee ruthless?
If you see his career and if you study his career from the 1950s onwards, he deals with his opponents very, very cleverly. And as I mentioned, whether it's a Balraj Madhok, who was very cleverly isolated in the 1950s, who was Vajpayee's great opponent. You see, when Shama Prasad Mukherjee died, Shama Prasad Mukherjee was an outstanding leader of the Janasangh. He was an extraordinary parliamentarian. Two people within the Janasangh then became Shama Prasad Mukherjee's so-called heirs, Balraj Madhok and Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Vajpayee in Hindi, Madhok in English. And Madhok was a very different character from Vajpayee. He was hard right-wing, free marketeer, pro-US, extrovert, gregarious. He would always be at embassy parties. Vajpayee was much more introverted, Hindi speaking. He was not an extrovert. He loved crowds, but he was not an extrovert. He was much more quiet. And Vajpayee realized that his rival within the Janasangh was Madhok. Madhok didn't have much time for Vajpayee or for Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. So it was a very interesting game. I described it very well. I mean, not very well. I don't know whether it's well or not, but I described it in detail in the book. How Vajpayee systematically isolated Madhok. You see, because Vajpayee had very good relations with Nehru, and Nehru noticed it. So he leveraged the power of the government. Nehru sent him abroad on a leader grant in 1960 to study the American elections, and his stature grew, and he used his rising stature. He took a populist socialist line. At the time when Madhok was taking a right-wing line, Vajpayee was taking a left-wing line. Vajpayee was taking a socialist line. And socialism, the Hindu socialism, was much more in tune with the cadres. So Madhok ended up completely isolated, and finally he was expelled in 1972. Same thing happened with Govindacharya. He dared to call Vajpayee a Mukhota. That was the end of Govindacharya. You can't stay on and call the supreme leader Mukhota. Kalyan Singh also acts. Dattopant Thengadi and Sundar Singh Bhandari have said, I've quoted in the book, that Vajpayee never allowed them to speak in the Rajya Sabha. Only he would speak. He could only be the star. Nobody was allowed to speak. So he was a very clever politician who was very ruthless. You don't get to the top by being nice people. You actually don't, and he had a sense of manifest destiny. Having written on Indira Gandhi and Vajpayee, I would say that the people who make their mark in history have this one common trait. They believe very strongly that they are special. That there's something about them that is special. That, why is this happening to me? Why are doors opening for me? Why are people applauding me? Why are people welcoming me? There must be something about me. She was convinced she was special because she was Nehru's daughter. He was convinced he was special because from the age of 20, late 20s, he was groomed by the RSS to be the big star. So he was convinced that he was the star. He was he was going to rise to the top. And anybody else who came in his way was axed very cleverly and very subtly, but with a sort of Machiavellian genius. That certainly makes him rule. As I say, Modi was his one big failure. Because by then he was too old and too tired.
Yeah, you have a question? Yes, please. That was the last question. You have a question?
Even I have.
Don't you think history is repeating itself? Modi doing things in the similar fashion which Vajpayee did.
No. I think I was as I was saying in the beginning of the talk. I think Modi is a completely different politician from Vajpayee. As I said, I think Vajpayee was primarily a parliamentarian. He was a parliamentarian for 50 years. Modi has never been in parliament, just in parliament for the last 8 years. Vajpayee reached out constantly to the opposition. Modi doesn't do that. Vajpayee was never the supremo. He was the main leader, but he was not he was not a supremo cult, that there is only Modi. I mean, who are the ministers today? For example, tell me who is the agriculture minister? Can you name him? You can name him. But normally you can't name ministers. Vajpayee's time, you could really, you knew who the ministers were. Yashwant Singh, Yashwant Singh, Arun Shuri, Murli Manohar Joshi. You had these, very powerful, strong ministers with their own personalities. So Vajpayee was not a you can't name the Gujarat chief minister. Who's the chief minister of Gujarat? Somebody, yes, there are journalists in the crowd. But Modi's following the Indira Gandhi model, high command. You pluck up someone from obscurity and appoint them as chief minister. Whether it was, in Maharashtra, Andhra, that's the Indira Gandhi high command way of operating. Vajpayee was never that kind of high command. He couldn't be. Because he was very much a person of the party. In 1995, when the BJP won in Gujarat, there was a rebellion in the Gujarat unit, and Vajpayee had to actually go there and modify the disputatious factions and actually bring them to some sort of understanding. I don't know if you remember, Uma Bharti had an open rebellion against Vajpayee on TV, saying, I don't agree with this India shining and all of that. So Vajpayee was not a supremo in his party, in the way that Modi is. He was much more of a politician who had to have anybody, take everybody along. If Vajpayee had been a supremo, he would have sacked Modi after 2002. He wanted to sack Modi. He couldn't, because he went along with his party. Today, if Mr. Modi wants to sack anybody, he'll just get sacked. I mean, I don't think there's even a question.
Sagarika ji, namaskar. This is me, Shweta Reddy, senior journalist from Telangana, and I'm also National General Secretary for Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay Sangh. And I've been watching your debates and I've been watching your news for the past 20-25 years. From that time, I was doing my news. I have done my news in TV9, NTV, and at News Republic, one of the topmost channels of Telangana. And first of all, I'd like to appreciate you for taking this enunciation. And the second thing is, what is your inspiration to introduce this book to the society?
Well, as I said, I think Mr. Vajpayee was someone who was a statesman. He was someone who was able to reconcile many different forms of opinion. He was able to bring many opinions together. Today we are very divided. We are split into many camps, this camp and that camp. Vajpayee was someone who believed very strongly in his ideology. He always said, I am a Swayam Sevak. He never broke with the RSS. He was critical of the RSS, but he never broke with the RSS. He never left the BJP. He didn't like being called the good man in the bad party. He always said that you can't say that you like the fruit, but you don't like the tree. So Vajpayee was very much in the RSS mold, in the BJP mold, but at the same time, while believing very strongly in his own ideology, he was able to reach out and create dialogue. And he was able to understand, he was able to listen, he was able to create a consensus and pursued consensus. I think that's the big lesson of Vajpayee. That you can believe in ideology, you can believe very strongly in your views, but that doesn't mean you can't dialogue. You can have friendship, you can have empathy, you can have association, you can even have love, but you may not have agreement. I think that sophistication of outlook is something we are missing today, and I think that's what Vajpayee represents.
So journalists are always independent, and journalists read the news, tell about so many political leaders in the news, There are so many parties like Congress Party, BJP, so many national parties, but why you have been influenced or affected by particularly Atal Bihari Vajpayee?
Well, actually, I've written a biography of Indira Gandhi before this. So this is my second biography. My first biography was of Indira Gandhi. My second is of Vajpayee, and there's a third prime minister coming. So by then I would have covered all the parties.
Right. Last question. It is little tough for you, but it's mandatory. Why you are hating Modi governance?
Modi?
Governance. Governance, ruling. Modi's style of ruling.
I don't hate anything, but as a journalist, I believe in asking questions. And I believe that whoever is in power, whether it's Vajpayee or whether it's Modi or whether it's whoever is in power, I believe the journalist always has to be the outsider and always has to ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to ask the last question. Ma'am, you mentioned that religious hatred was never tapped into in this manner earlier, but it was always perhaps a winning strategy. In that sense, I was thinking in 2009, when 26/11 was very fresh in public memory, and the Kandhamal riots had happened, anti-Christian riots in Orissa, and after 26/11, we had Varun Gandhi's, within quotes, alleged hate speech, but it was there. And the BJP didn't really condemn it or distance itself from it. Why didn't it work then for a victory for the BJP at that time? If it really sold so well, even if it was the ZGs even at that time, because it was tapped into.
Well, I think, the question we have to ask is why did he make that speech in the first place? And he made that speech in the first place because clearly there are takers for that language. The BJP may not have come to power in 2009, but that doesn't mean that religious mobilization was not going on. There were certainly speeches being made, and there were, in fact, leaders who were speaking in a certain language. But I think 2009 was a victory of the Congress. 2004 was an anomaly. It was made possible purely by the results in Tamil Nadu and Andhra. 2009 was Manmohan Singh's victory, and I think that the nuclear deal and Manmohan economics and all of that won it for the Congress. To say that, every time somebody makes a speech, they should win. Well, Varun Gandhi won. He won that election. So, but he made that speech. So, I mean, that was the beginning, I would say, of a certain religious mobilization. Not the beginning, but as I say, this is a strand which is there in our lives. There is a feeling of Hindu grievance, right? That the Hindus are minorities in their own land. The Muslims are being appeased. The Muslims are being given too many benefits. And to look at it rationally, I would say there were flaws in Nehruvian secularism. There were certain flaws in Nehruvian secularism. I think that because of that, because Nehru was coming right after partition, and he was coming right after the riots, and he was coming right after the terrible communal Holocaust. So he bent over backwards, I think, to make sure that the Muslims felt secure in India. But that led to a kind of a backlash from the other side. So this cause has always been there in India. Vajpayee didn't choose to highlight it in his career, but Advani did, and it led to big gains for him. And many other leaders have, and it always has led to gains.
Thank you. Yeah, literally last question. So I have not gone through this book. I just bought it.
Oh, good.
And in fact, first my father will read, and then of course I will read. So the way it happened in the when I bought the Inga, another book, right? So anyway, my question is, you said at one point of time that Mr. Vajpayee was not a very big election winner. His highest was 182 or something like that, right? So, what's your idea about? The way the media is behaving as of now in India, and the social media is playing its own role, right? If the same situation would have been in 2004, then what would have been the result? don't you think that the Vajpayee would have been a much bigger, election winner
if the media had been with him, with Vajpayee?
I think so. Yeah.
No, I mean the media.
The way the social media and the media is playing their role nowadays.
Yes, I think that the capture of the media has been a fundamental to Mr. Modi's success. He completely monopolizes the media space. He monopolizes social media. The opposition is invisible. Where is the opposition? We don't see it. So I think the capture of the media is fundamental to Mr. Modi's rise. But I think in 2004, that election actually, Vajpayee lost because of two very strategic reasons. The BJP broke off its relationship with the DMK just before the election. And that was a big mistake because the DMK won all the seats in Tamil Nadu. And Vajpayee, and in Andhra Pradesh, they were swayed by Chandrababu Naidu, who thought Chandrababu Naidu thought he was definitely going to win. So it was it was the result of Andhra and Tamil Nadu that brought the BJP down. Otherwise, if these two states had won it for the BJP, he would have formed the government. So I think that was it was a psephological anomaly. But that doesn't mean that in 2004, Vajpayee didn't control the media. Vajpayee was everywhere. That was the India Shining campaign, as you remember. He was on television, he was on radio, he was on badges. Pramod Mahajan was masterminding this whole communication, reach out. He was sending you used to get SMSs in those days. Vajpayee going around, and those caps, Atal. And then there was that World Wildlife Fund, that wrestler with Abang Atal. So all of that was there.
But then the social media reach was not there.
Social media reach there was no Twitter or Facebook in 2004. But again, I don't think we should say that Mr. Modi's success is only because of Twitter and Facebook. Mr. Modi is, I have a huge criticism of Mr. Modi, but he's a very charismatic leader. He's a very charismatic person. And he's playing a kind of religious politics that has takers. His personality is amplified by social media, and capture of the media has made his victory possible. But is it only the media? Is it only capture of the media? Is it only social media that has made the Modi phenomenon possible? I don't think so. You have to have a winning personality to start with. Mr. Rahul Gandhi can capture the media, capture social media, capture Twitter, but would Mr. Rahul Gandhi win elections? I don't know.
I doubt. Anyway, thank you very much. Wonderful. It was a lively discussion. I didn't realize it was going to go so long. And
Thank you so much. It was really
probing questions.
Excellent questions, and it was really wonderful to be here.
Yeah, she's here to autograph copies of books if you buy. And before that, I want to give you a memento.
Thank you so much. Love.